Hi everybody, welcome to week 10 of this course. Last week we covered the differences between free trade and protectionism. Well, we concentrated on protectionism. You need to go and do the other readings on free trade. It's very important that you know both sides of the coin. You know both views, you know what free trade is about, you know what protectionism is about. That is definitely going to be tested in some form of an essay. So it's not about just taking facts. You need to be able to form some type of argument based on what is being asked. That is important going forward. For this week's lecture, this is based on a colleague's notes. So this is from Simba. Simba is the one who provided these lecture slides. It is his own work. It's not based on the textbook slides or on anybody else's slides. And that it's just from Simba's work. This chapter, chapter 10, which is for week 10, is probably one of the most difficult to read through chapters. The maths in deriving how the formulas came about is not so important. What you need to be able to understand is, okay, if I give you the equation, what is that equation about? Can you tell me and explain every variable in that equation? That is the most important part you need to be able to do. Yes, there's going to be a couple of other equations that come up. Then you're going to be able to put in some values and you have to be able to derive an answer. So the mathematics involved in this is not the derivation or how the formulas or equations came up. It's more, okay, I give you the equation. If I give you certain values, are you able to apply it to the equation? Or are you able to explain what the equation is about? You don't need to explain all the optimization or the optimization of mathematics that occurred for you to derive that equation. That is very, very important for what you need to understand. This is an incredibly difficult chapter to read. So let me iterate this. You are probably and most likely not going to be tested on this chapter. For your, what paper am I referring to? So for your exams, what you're not going to be tested on in your normal final exam, I have not posted a question on this chapter. I'm helping you here. You find this chapter difficult, then I want you to concentrate on all the other chapters and the other texts that I've given you. This is not coming in your final exam. And it is not in a supplementary also. So if you fail the final exam and you get put for the supplementary, you don't need to worry about it. But if you are the poor bloke who is applied for SDA for a special exam because you need one course to be able to pass your degree, then unfortunately what you're going to find out that this question appears. The way I see it is you have a lot more time to go be able to read through this, and if you're writing the essay, guess what, you have my contact details. Ask me for help. Maybe I'm able to help you through go through maybe a technical question on this. So to reiterate, what is important for you to understand going forth is I am not going to test you on this chapter, chapter 10, for your final exam and for your supplementary exam in terms of a very large question of maybe 15, 20 marks or something. If there is any component, there's maybe like 2, 3, 4 marks. Simple question. It's not going to ask for application in that sense. Having said that, be very aware that if you write the special exam, there is a massive question on chapter 10. And it's not a fun question if you don't understand the chapter. So take that in consideration, right? I'm giving you a big hint. Don't need to study this chapter going for the exam and for the supplementary exam. For those who are unfortunate not to pass the first time, you don't need to worry about this because of the difficulty in reading this. So what we're going to do is first, when we start this in terms of our overview, we're going to look at some empirical observations. We can present some sort of puzzle, both from perfect competition theories, which are being linked to part 2 of this textbook. And then we're going to show you the puzzle in terms of inter-industry trade. So that is what this reading is about. What is inter-industry trade? And then we're going to show you index, the Grubel-Lloyd index, and the application of this. It's very simple to plug in values, so you're not going to see this in form of a type, but go and practice and put values in. It shouldn't be difficult. And Then we're also going to show why inter-industry is becoming important, especially for developed countries. And then finally, we're going to look at the Dixit-Stiglitz model, which is incorporating the idea of inter-industry trade with a variety of products and then link it to inter-industry trade and then talk about the final goods that come from the Krugman interpretation and then look at the intermediate goods from the ECO interpretation. So there's two interpretations. You will need to know this probably for if you wrote the special exam, but I'm letting you off for now because I don't want you to struggle with a chapter that is quite difficult to read. But this chapter will come again if you're doing honors next year and you decide to do trade. So we're going to look at two interpretations of the inter-industry trade based on the Dixit-Stiglitz model. That is what we're going to end up doing. So we're going to look empirical one now. We're going to look at Europe. We're going to look at its breakdown of its exports and imports relative to which countries it is exporting to. So if we look at the amount of exports that Europe has, it's about 5.632 billion. And at the same time, how much it imports is about 5.844 billion. It's quite similar. The imports and exports is about the same. Then we look at, okay, what is the percentage of export that goes to the rest of the world? Outside Europe, right? Outside Europe, about 30% of the exports is going to the rest of the world. At the same time, if you look at in terms of the imports, about 30% of the imports are also coming from the rest of the world. So that means if we ignore now the 30%, there's 70% of trade in Europe is occurring with the European countries. So there's some intra-industry trade or intra-Euro trade that is occurring within Europe. And what we're going to see is that this is quite strange considering that these countries look very much the same. They're very similar in their makeup. When we're looking at world trade flows, what we're showing here is the difference between intra and inter-regional trade. The intra, the A, are all the orange bars. The blue bars represent inter with the E, regional trade flows. In all the world trade flows, we find that Europe to Europe is roughly about 27%. And then if you look at Asia to Asia, that is roughly about maybe 17%. And then if we look at the highest inter-regional trade, that is from Europe to Asia, that is just under 10%. That looks like about maybe 8.5%. So this is the things that we're trying to highlight. We're showing that from the world trade flows, a lot of it is to do with inter-regional trade. To further show inter-industry trade and inter-industry trade, that's intra with the A and inter with the E trade. What we've established here is looking at Chinese exports and imports. All the blue or light blue highlighted products are a representation of intra-industry trade. That's the one with the A. And all the orange bars here, all the orange products highlighted here is a representation of inter-industry trade. So what we mean by intra-industry trade in terms of the blue bars, if we look at 85, if we look at it in terms of electric and electronic equipment, we find that there's a huge amount of it being exported, about 389 billion. But we're also finding there's a huge amount of it being imported. That's about 314 billion. So the exports and imports are very similar in terms of its value. Not necessarily the same, not exactly close, but there's a huge chunk of both exports and imports related to this product for China. Very important to consider. And if you look at inter-industry trade, so these are the red things. This is with the E we're talking about, inter with the red or the orange bars. What we're finding that you'll find there are lots of exports happening for this product, but there's little to no imports happening on this product. So we look at number 61. If we look at apparel, accessories, knit, or crochet, we find there's about 67 billion being exported, but only about 1 billion being imported. So there's important things that you need to consider. What is the difference between intra and inter-industry trade? In summing, we've shown that about 70% of European trade is from one European country to another. We also show that in terms of world trade flows, about 27% of that is from intra-euro trade. We also showed that on that same section with the table highlighted 27% of the world trade flow, we showed how big this was for Asia and for North America. Unfortunately, and it's very, very difficult to establish, is why these trade flows occur between similar types of countries with similar technology and relative factor endowments based on perfect competition models of part 2A of the textbook. That is very difficult to establish that, and we're not going to cover that in this course, and that will be left for maybe expansion in honors. And we just use China to show many sectors, and we've shown also that there are large imports and simultaneously large exports for China. So what we're going to try to do is better understand these inter-industry trade flows, but not from a perfect competition point. Finally, we're going to try to define inter-industry trade and look at the Grubel-Lloyd index. If we define inter-industry trade, it is when we're looking at the simultaneously imports and exports of similar type of goods or services for a country. This is going to occur in two forms. Firstly, maybe in terms of horizontal industry trade, or can occur in the form of vertical inter-industry trade. So in terms of horizontal, yeah, we're looking at the same stages of processing. So the quality is kept the same, but there is some product differentiation. So what we can think about here is if we're having the same type of quality, maybe we can compare American cars and Germany cars. Say there was trading between the two countries and they're both exporting sedans. America is exporting their sedan towards Germany and Germany is exporting their sedan to America. So same type of goods, same type of value, but the quality is basically the same. That is the main thing. If you think about vertical industry trade or vertical intra-industry trade, here we're referring to changes occurring at different stages of the processing. We're referring here, maybe at the term you use is fragmentation. What we mean here is at these different stages in the processing, the quality between the two type of products traded is changed. They are altered through all these processes. So for example, what I mean here, if you look at China and their clothing, when they export clothing, what type of quality is their clothing? Usually of a poor quality, right? Low quality. But if you now import maybe from America clothing or China imports from America, usually the quality from America is much more higher. So similar clothes, maybe these jeans is being swapped between the two, but the quality of what China is giving forth is far less than what America's quality would be. You can use another example, you can look in terms of cars. If Germany and China traded, even if we have the same type of car, same make, not make, but maybe also sedan, the quality of the Chinese sedan versus Germany sedan, it's totally different. So the main thing you need to understand is the quality differences. In horizontal, the quality remains the same, while in vertical, the quality does not stay the same between these products. And that's the most important thing. And then finally, we have the Grubel-Lloyd index, which is just defined as 1 minus the difference between the exports and imports in a sector divided by the exports and imports in the same sector. So this index is done for a sector. If you look at sector I, you take the exports of that sector and you take the imports of that sector and you plug it into this equation. It shouldn't be really difficult. When you calculate the Grubel-Lloyd index, it can vary from 0 to 1. 0 represents pure inter-industry trade, and 1 represents pure intra-industry trade. Any other value between 0 and 1, the closer it is to 1, the more we're dealing with intra-industry trade. We also have the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They have listed some characteristics for IIT, which stands for Intra-Industry Trade. And they have found that the value of this global Lloyd index has risen quite significantly from 1980. It is also particularly high for sophisticated manufacturing products. It is also high for very open economies, meaning they have very little restrictions, and is also connected to FDI inflows, foreign direct investment inflows. So this is more when you go look at transition economies, and that will be in chapter 12. And then we can also say that the inter-industry trade value is also high when we are dealing with preferential trade agreements. So if you look at NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, you will find that inter-industry trade between America, Canada, and Mexico is quite high. And also, to a large extent, when we analyze the inter-industry trade, we find that it is more firm-based. A lot of the links are between firms, not actually between countries. So what we're going to show now in the next few slides, we're going to look at China, and we're going to show the more detailed sectors, and we're going to link it to inter-industry trade, and we're going to show that the values for inter-industry trade or the global Lloyd index is a bit lower when we deal with more detailed sectors. But over time, just like the OECD has found in terms of its empirical characteristics, it is also becoming more important over time, meaning the value is increasing over time, coming closer and closer to 1. So we look at China. So what you need to understand, what is 3 digits, 2 digits, and 1 digit? 1 digit, 2 digits, 3 digits is a number. If it's 1 digit, it's either 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those are 1 digits. So they represent a certain sector, certain type of production. 2 digits are 10, 11, 12, 13, etc., etc., etc. Right? So those are representing certain types of production. And then we also have 3-digit numbers, which are like 100, 101, 102, 103. They represent certain sectors. So in total, when we look at the 1-digit sectors, there are only 10 sectors. When we look at the 2-digit sectors, there's 67 sectors. And when we look at 3-digit sectors, there are 237 sectors. The 1-digit sectors are the less detailed sectors. So when we're dealing with higher numbers in terms of digits, then we're also dealing with more sophisticated or more detailed sectors. So this is what we see from China. We see that the 3-digit sectors, their value for inter-industry trade in general is lower than the 2-digit ones and the 1-digit calculations. But over time, from 1980 to 2005, all three, 1-digit, 2-digit, and 3-digit, their inter-industry trade value or the global Lloyd index increases over time. And if we had to look at the 3-digit sectors versus the 5-digit sectors, we find that the global Lloyd index is lower for the 5-digit sectors than the 3-digit sectors for all years from 1962 to 2006. So this is also an indication of the more detailed sectors having a lower inter-industry trade value. Moving to the Dixit-Stiglitz monopolistic competition or the DS model. So this is a model used to represent intra-industry trade. It was designed by Paul Krugman. He realized that when we looked at exported goods, usually it was similar but not exactly identical. So he decided, okay, I can take this other work that I've done on my monopolistic competition and then try to apply to intra-industry trade. So, for example, something that you saw in terms of what was traded, if you looked at mobile phones between South Korea, you found that South Korea usually exported LG mobile phones but imported Nokia mobile phones. We know that this is very similar technology, and the fact and case using them is quite the same, but they're not exactly the same. They are similar. So he used that idea, okay, we have different varieties, similar quality, similar technology, almost the same fact intensity we are using, I think I can apply the Dixit-Stiglitz monopolistic competition model to industry trade. So the demand function he drew from is the demand function, bless you. So the demand function that he brought from that model is listed here on the sheet. This is utility equal to the sum of Ci to a parameter alpha, and we're summing from I equals to 1 to n. And once we sum that finish, we take it to the exponent over 1 over a, which is also parameter. So this is just a function. C stands here for consumption. U stands here for utility. I is just the variety index, how many products there is in the market. Alright, so you're consuming, if it's C1, you're consuming product 1. If there's a second product, C2, C3, C4. And that is very important. We are having n variety. That's the amount of products that we're having in this market. It makes a massive difference in terms of finding an equilibrium position or a nice answer, the larger n is. So the more varieties is in the market, the less play that if you had a firm, your product would have on the rest of the competitors when you price. That is important. And yes, if there's only 2 firms, then price of your product will play a lot in the market. Anyways, you just need to know the utility function. You need to know what it looks like. You need to be able to explain to me what every variable is. Well, this is where the chapter becomes a lot more difficult. This is where the math intensifies. You do not need to know the mathematics that leads to the answers, but you need to be able to understand the process. You need to know, okay, I'm taking these functions, and that is how am I going to find my utility maximization. You also need to be able to explain each function that is being used. You do not need to show the steps that you derive to find simplifications or utility maximization. But you should be able to explain everything. You should be able to also use values and plug it in the equations. But guess what? As we know, you're not getting tested on this in your final paper and your supplementary paper. But for those unfortunate to write the special paper, be careful. For those that need the scores to pass, be careful. This is definitely going to become a part. But guess what? Just hit me up an email or something and we can go through some calculations to help you. Alright? For now, we're going to skip the intensity that this might bring because I don't want you to get lost in the work. The application mathematics that I need is done in the earlier chapters. Alright? I didn't ask you to derive any formulas there, but I did ask you to be able to interpret graphs. You need to be able to also derive certain values using functions, but you never needed to derive the functions. Anyways, on the side, so you have the utility function. Now we need an income function or the budget line. And the budget line is merely linked to the prices of each product times its consumption of each product. So if you had 2 products, product 1 and product 2, and the price of product 1 was 2 Rand and the price of product 2 was 5 Rand, and you consume 4 of both goods, then the amount of income you have available is 4 times 2, or your budget available is 4 times 2 plus 5 times 2, which will give you 18. So it's just a simple process like that, taking the price of each product and timesing by the consumption of each product. I'm also assuming it's in varieties, just as utility is about in varieties. The budget line also has in varieties, because this is able to find what your consumer welfare is. And then we do the normal maximization. This is the tricky part. You can skip that maximization part. You just need to know what you land up with. So we land up with the demand for firm I, which is the consumption for each good, equal to some constant times the prices of that individual good to the power of E. Right? E is some elasticity thing that is calculated, and it's listed to the right of that. Elasticity is equal to 1 over 1 minus alpha, and this value must be more than 1. Okay, so that is your demand for each firm. It's listed there. The constant here, why they call it a constant, because everything that is listed in a constant, and you can go to the textbook and see what the constant looks like, but everything that is listed in that constant is not determined by the firm. They will just take that as given. So the prices of other firms is taken as given. The number of competitors is taken as given. And the general income level in the economy is taken as given. So the only thing that matters for this firm is the elasticity and the price of its own good. Okay, that is the most important thing you need to know. And then what we're going to do on the next few slides, we're going to assume that firm I takes this as given, all these things that I mentioned in terms of the constant, and we're going to profit maximization to get some unique variety of I, which we're going to show on the next few slides. Okay, it's very tough this. If you look at the mathematics, you get lost. Just remember, in total, when you're dealing with a Dixit-Stiglitz model, you have a utility function, which is given in the previous slide. You have the income function, or your budget constraint, which is given on the slide. You maximize those two. You don't need to know the mathematics, and you derive the demand for each firm. The demand for each firm is directly related to the prices of that firm to some power of elasticity. And we list what the elasticity is towards the right. And then the constant, which is the prices of each firm and the number of competitors and the general income level of the economy, that is just given, and firms don't need to consider that when they're trying to determine how much demand exists for that firm. When we deal with a monopolistic competition, when we find any price or quantity that happens in the market, for each firm, what do we need to know? We need to know when the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. That's when we need to find. So we have the demand function, it's listed earlier, that is the consumption of each firm, which is CI equal to that constant times by the price of that firm to the power of E. We had that on the previous slide, right? When you find the marginal revenue curve, how do you find it? You take the first derivative of the demand curve, right? When you find that it is 1 minus 1e. That is what the curve is. When you find the derivative, and you can go and do the calculation, but that's not important. But that 1 minus 1 over e is lower than the demand curve. So we draw this dotted line in here, MR, which is the lower MR curve than the demand curve. Then we find the place where marginal revenue equals a marginal cost. Right? We're assuming constant markup. Right? That is the most important thing. And that's going to allow us to determine what price and quantity we're going to actually have for this firm. At the place where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, there is operating profits. And we're also assuming that with the Stiglitz model, that there are fixed costs. A firm has a fixed cost to cover. So beyond the marginal revenue, which covers the cost for each production that comes into place, it needs to be able to cover the fixed cost that exists when it started the business, that factory bought in order for it to actually make profit over time. If the operating profit is more than the fixed cost, then the firm enters into the market. That is important. Remember, when marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that is the point where monopolistic competition would price. At that particular point, you're making operating profits. These operating profits that you make must cover your fixed cost, or it must be more than your fixed cost. If it is not more than your fixed cost, then you will not enter the market, because it's no use your profit maximizing where MR equals MC, but the operating profits that you're making doesn't even cover the amount of money that you invested into the firm. All right. So as long as your operating profits is more than your fixed cost, you enter into the market. And it is important for you to understand. If not, you won't enter into the market or you leave the market. But as long as that operating profits exceed the fixed cost, more and more firms will enter if that exists. So that's important that you need to know, right? Fixed costs must be covered when you're dealing with maximization. When you're dealing with marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Important. And once you do that, you can determine the price that's in the market and the quantity that's in the market. Nothing too hard in that explanation. This is exactly an interpretation of monopolistic competition that you can find for micro. So the importance of this graph is tied here. Okay, our operating profit is more than our fixed cost. So there's some profit to be made. What happens then? A new firm enters into the market. Because in Tyson, there is profits to be made. That profit is more than what the fixed cost is. So a new firm enters in the market and causes the demand curve to shift to the left. Why is the demand curve shifting to the left? Because now for your product, because of the other variety that is now existing, people are tempted to buy from that other product. So there's less demand for your own product because of the amount of variety increasing. So now your demand curve shifts to the left automatically because the marginal revenue curve is linked to the demand curve. It's also going to shift to the left. You have a new place where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's at C star. At C star, the quantity has now reduced to Q star, to Q apostrophe, from Q to Q apostrophe, but the prices have remained the same. But your operating profit has decreased. It is that orange block, right? That's your operating profit. Initially speaking, your operating profit was the little yellow block and the orange block together, right? But now you have a reduction, you lose the yellow block, and now there's less operating profit. And as long as that operating profit is more than the fixed cost, you're going to attract more people to enter in the market, causing a shift of the demand curve to occur again, both again downwards or to the left. Up till the point this will occur is when the operating profits is exactly equal to your fixed cost. When that is happening, then there's no incentive for another firm to enter. Another firm enter means everybody start making losses. The operating profits does not cover the fixed cost. So that is the point where it will happen also. This is something you need to understand. So in the long run, there's no profit. So this is zero profit condition, and that is determined by the amount of varieties. The amount of varieties affected demand curve, as you see. And it's important also to see that it's a proportional shift in the sizes. The price is remaining the same. All that's happening is the quantity is changing. What we're going to show here is the idea that more products or more variety leads to higher utility. What you need to do is use the budget line or your income line, determine how many of each product you're going to buy. Once you determine your consumption of each product, C1, C2, C3, you take those C values and then you plug it into where? You plug it into your utility function. So in case they give you a utility function right on top, which is as per usual based on the parameter of alpha equals 0.5, it's the sum of I equals to 1 till n of the square root of Ci. And this is all squared. Right? Important thing that you need to know. Okay, let's assume the first case we have one variety, or n equal to 1. We assume we have an income of 8 Rand. We assume that the price of the one good that is in the market is 1 Rand. If you spend your budget on the one good, it will be 8 Rand divided by the 1 Rand for the product, and that will give you 8 units of product 1. You take that 8 units and you plug it in utility function, and you'll find that utility U1 is equal to 8. Now we change it up. We say now there's two products. They have the same price, still 1 Rand each for product 1, and our product 2 is also 1 Rand. If you spend your income on those two products, where the prices of good 1 is 1 Rand and the price of good 2 is also 1 rand. You will buy 4 units of both goods. Right, same price, so you're going to buy the same amount of units, right? 4 times 1 rand for product 1 plus 4 times 1 rand for product 2 is equal to your income of 8. Your next step now is to plug those values of consumption of C1 and C2 into your utility function of U2. When you plug it into the utility function, you find that the utility you get now for 2 products in the market at the same prices is equal to 16. So utility when there was 2 products is higher than when there was 1 product. Having keeping the budget the same, keeping the price for good 1 the same. You're only changing the variety or N. By changing N will lead to a higher utility. And this is called the idea of love of variety. So what you need to consider here is the idea that the larger your market size is, the more variety you will have. This is what the Kruger model is basically trying to say. So for instance, we have Belgium. They have 5 million workers. They have 10,000 variety. If we have now Netherlands, which has 7,000 workers, how many variety will we have? And if we assume, and we know that the N, the amount of variety, is proportional to market size, all we need to say is the extra 2 million from what Belgium has, from 5 million to 7 million, that extra 2 million is exactly 2 over 5 times 10,000, which is 4,000. And you take that 4,000, you add it to 10,000, gives you 14,000 in terms of variety. The other way to do that is to say, okay, since we're dealing with proportionality, we're moving from 5 to 7 million, we can say 7 over 5 times the varieties in Belgium, and we'll land up with 14,000 varieties. What you should know from this is the more variety you have, what you usually have, the more utility you have. So you can assume in this case that Netherlands or the Dutch has higher welfare, purely based because the market size is bigger. Moving to free trade. The previous slide got to do with autarky. We now moving to free trade. But you must understand that everything in the Krugman model is proportional to the amount of variety that exists. Okay, that is the most important thing you need to understand, because that is what the calculations are all about. So now under free trade, when the two economies interact with each other, Netherlands and Belgium, what we find that what stays the same is the trade production levels are still the same and the prices still stay the same. But for consumers now, instead of being only seen to 10,000 variety in terms of Belgium or 14,000 variety in terms of Netherlands, both consumers are now exposed to all 24,000 varieties. So what will happen that in that case, the Dutch will import a part of the production from Belgium. So we'll import some of the varieties from Belgium. And at the same time, it will pay for it by its exporting of its product and its production to Belgium. So the Dutch imports from Belgium the varieties it never had, and then it pays for this by exporting its production to Belgium. And this is a two-way trade in similar products that we're talking about, and this is what inter-industry trade is. And in total, because consumers now are exposed to more varieties, and there is more utility welfare for both countries. And this purely happens just because the market got bigger and the variety has increased, and that has led to your gains from trade. EPS interpretation is slightly different. His is very similar to the DS Krugman model, which we have discussed earlier, except that instead of viewing the final goods, he looked at it in terms of intermediate goods. So he derived the same mathematical structure. The formula you see there on the page is the same, just the variables look different, but it's saying the same things. And what he meant by intermediate product is not the final goods traveling. So we're not sending a car over, we're sending the components of a car. All the things that make up the final good is being sent between the two countries or being exchanged. And his model like that says that there is definitely then productivity gains that you can gain through this intermediate goods being intra-industry traded. This is just a graphical representation of the Krugman model. So what we find, country A, all these final products form exports that goes from country A to country B. And all the final products of country B, which is in red, those are then exported from country B to country A. And in that way, we are gaining in terms of variety. All products, all final goods from one country is traded to another country who trades his final goods in exchange. The intra-industry trade model is a bit different. So I'm going to add a bit more to what I didn't say earlier, is we have now intermediate goods being exchanged between two countries. In the Krugman model, who's the one that's buying the good and exporting the good or consuming the good? It is consumers. The final good is going directly to the last person in the line that will consume, as consumers. In the intermediate world, when you are now selling your intermediate good, where's it going first? Remember, it's a door coming. The door is first going to go to where? To the producer, to the firm that is going to use the door and install it and set it up on a car. Alright? So he's going to get a door from this country and maybe the wheels, and he's going to get a whole lot of components from another country. It goes into his production process. It's going to make the final good, and then that final good is going to go towards the consumer. So the producers are the one who gain from the variety in the market through variety of intermediate goods. That is for the easier interpretation. In the Krugman model, the consumers gain automatically first. So we're going to end with a bit of graphs for China. We're going to look at the vertical intra-industry trade. Remember, vertical intra-industry trade is to do with the quality changes that occur through various processes of production, while horizontal intra-industry trade is to do with the idea that the quality is the same between goods that are traded. It's just they are similar but not exactly the same. So what we find for China is that they mainly import ICT goods. So they mostly bring in components. So the things that make up the final product, they bring that in. They then assemble all these components and produce a final good which they export. Why do they do that? Because they're very much a labor intensive country. They have lots of labor intensive assembly stages. So in a way, the production process is a bit more fragmented, and that is more in chapter 15 if you're going to have to look at that. You can look at what fragmented means in that sense. But for our studies, you just need to know it's fragmented because of the process of having intermediate goods being imported from another country and then used to produce a final good using China's labor, and that final good then is exported. So quickly to show what fragmentation is about, it's different from the traditional process where you have one firm in a country, it takes the inputs available to it in the country and then produces a final good that goes towards the market. In a globalized fragmentation production process, we have multiple firms from different countries involved in different production blocks. And ultimately, through that process, it maybe lands up at in the last production block at maybe a firm in another country, and then they produce the final good. But every firm that is involved in the production process takes the inputs from the previous firm, creates some good. It might be intermediate good, or it makes a component. It takes that component and that intermediate good, sends it to the next firm that's involved, maybe from a different country. And they now follow through on the next production process, and eventually all that sending the goods from one firm to another firm lands up by a final firm which takes that final intermediate good, which is no longer needed to be processed except in that firm, and then produces a final good. It's important here to realize the example here is just example. You could have 3, 4, 5 firms. At the second stage here, we have block 2 and block 3. You could have had block 2, block 3, block 4, block 5. Could have been a couple of processes in there. So this is just an example, just showing that there are multiple firms, just showing that there's multiple firms involved and multiple countries involved. And then finally, looking at the trade balance which China has with its neighboring and other countries, we find that the orange components, which are its imports, and the blue components, which are its exports, we find that most of its electronic components are being imported from its neighboring countries, from neighboring suppliers, so places like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand. And a lot of what it's exporting is then going towards Hong Kong, USA, and the EU. The EU 15 there is just 15 selected European Union countries. To summarize, some concluding remarks, we've shown that trade flows are intensive between similar countries when they have similar technology and factor abundance. So that's a bit different from the HO model, right? So there's still goods being traded between two countries, even though they have similar factor abundance. And we've shown that there's a two-way trade in similar goods. This is the inter-industry trade. We've shown the measure for inter-industry trade. That's the global Lloyd Index. We've shown that product variety and we showed fragmentation are important to understand inter-industry trade. We show that the number of goods available is limited by economies of scale. And then we also show the idea of market power or monopolistic competition that is shown by the Dixit-Stiglitz model. And we're assuming a constant markup. And then we also show trading final goods raises the extent of the market and it leads to variety gains. When there's more variety, there's more utility. And the Kruger model, which we were shown, is mainly to do with horizontal inter-industry trade. And then we showed the ECO model, which is more to do with vertical inter-industry trade. The Kruger model is about final goods, and the ECO model is about intermediate goods. So if you were to get a question like this, it could easily be a discussion between the ECO model and the Kruger model. But yeah, all the best. If you do get a question, hopefully you do not land up that point where you get questions from this chapter. So the slides I think is sufficient for your understanding. Don't think you really need to read through the textbook. It might make you lost because a lot of what is explained is from the formulas and sometimes they're trying to explain in terms of maths. I've tried my best not to make it in terms of maths. If you need any further clarification on these models that were presented, then just pop me an email or arrange for some private consultation or send me a message on eConvo.